Overview, counterpoint K.
Two strategic contestants in the 2-1-R means Miami wins the debate. The first is that they are not going to be able to solve for any of our case because they're not going to be able to solve for private violence, i.e. that occurs within houses, which is 90% of violence according to the 1AC. The second is that when you look at capitalism, you must take the view from someone who has lived under socialist rule and been abused by it. This is an argument Ilya made in the 1AR. They are have no response to it in the 2NR, meaning you have to always be skeptical of radical calls against capitalism. Counterpoint? At the top, extend the civil remedies that only the government, by doing the 14th Amendment, they will only be able to solve for civil remedies inside of things like government facilities and out in the public, meaning they can't solve for private actors, i.e. when people get beaten inside of the house, 90% of the violence, because that is key to the commodification of people. This is grounded in our McKinnon 2000 evidence and our Benedict 2000 evidence to why the Commerce Clause is key to be able to open up this sphere for public space. This has a bunch of different impacts. From the 1AC, the first of the war against women is worse than nuclear conflicts. That's the Chalmers 2002 evidence on how domestic violence, every single person ever can be abused, always scared they'd be the next target. Dehumanizing ramifications rob individuals' self means they don't care whether they live or die, and extinction is inevitable. That means that these people are already dead, so they cannot be affected by the capitalist system. This is all the claims from R1AC, and finally, our call for equality comes first. The West evidence says it's not a good idea. The courts must take every stand to remediate sexual subordination and exploitation. The call for justice the pre-run. Look at the improbable impacts of the criticism. Only the app can access that. And permutation. This should be a very easy decision on the permutation because the 2NC concessions about the function of discourse and your vow, that they are in a double bind. Either A, the counterpoint links to the critique because the civil rights remedy inevitably calls victimization, their own strategic evidence, internal link between victimization, perpetuation, and capitalism. The argument says that this is because they do a critical examination of capitalism via their discourse, i.e. their strategic evidence, and says you need to have a complete rejection of capitalism, which they would not do. And or B is the discourse precluding our policy action, therefore, and therefore the permutation of the case of combination, the examining capitalism to the 14th Amendment via their alternative would be necessarily function as a shield against their links from the Commerce Clause, because although they may be using capitalism just like the counterpoint is, while we are doing critical analysis, there's no logical way that they can both argue that their discourse solves a residual link from the K and the counterpoint, and why they would solve from the K and the K impact to the plan. And they justified this by the fact that they do have the actual counterpoint solved for all the cap. The discourse solves only on it. They only need to win one for the Commerce Clause is going to cause it to happen. Their evidence isn't simply good enough. It proves why the permutation is going to be able to solve. And it doesn't mean that the narrow, and they make arguments about how it would make the decision more narrow, but it doesn't become more narrow because the court decides from the perspectives all the time. It would not shrink on how it's done. This answers all of their arguments, meaning we can still solve for their racism argument because it would just be Commerce Clause and the 14th Amendment, not any sort of a combination of the two in the decision. That's just why it would be do both, meaning it solves for their racism impact. This is also hedges seriously against OK because of the fact that there are not only economies of variant, he does no work on it here, and it's wrong in how the court decides. The text of the permutation doesn't like combine them inside of the way the decision works. And our permutation finally proves a double bind. Either the alternative is so strong that it easily overcome the negative aspects of the plan, or the alternative isn't strong enough and it wouldn't solve on it anyway. Okay? At the top, group the top parts of the link debate and extend our Resnick evidence. There's two pieces. The way that we do this commodification isn't in terms of capitalism, it's in terms of making people into producers instead of commodities, meaning that they already in turn of the capitalist system now, they are already the commodities of it. We have just to use them strategically inside of the system to change their alignment, making them be able to solve better. That's the first part. And the second is that it might be beneficial, it ignores the actual ways to be able to achieve the problem for women that is impacted above on the private violence of the 1AC. They say the victimization turns, but that was the double bind on the permutation. Ilya talked about that earlier. They say that the McKinnon evidence would be valuable enough, but we personify and give that people the value they need inside of society, turning capitalism inward on itself. Except the government evidence that the transition from capitalism to a different system of economics causes opportunistic dictators to take control of politics, only amplified the vagueness of the alternative, but we do not know exactly how they are transitioning away from capitalism because people lost in disarray and look at the guidance of a new system. This transition period gives right authoritarian regimes such as the Bosnia, the USSR, and other failed states in the Eastern Bloc. You should prefer our evidence because the only one that seeks the question of what the relation to the alternative actually looks like. More than they could not give one example of successful transition from capitalism to another economic system. This is an impact on the reason why capitalism is bad, because exploitation, the most basic political rights are protected with totalitarianism, then accelerating things such as slavery, racist governmental policies are reinstituted, which is impacted by their racism impact culminating in extinction. Now, they say that they saw this because they lead to the root of violence, but the transitions is where we get at, meaning they will never be able to get to the breaking down of capitalism, meaning the violence is just going to become worse and more pervasive. They say that they solve for hierarchies and turns case, but they're not going to be able to get there. It's going to inevitably fail their political project, meaning it doesn't turn case. Plus, they don't turn case. We have specific solvency. This was a new argument in the 2NR. Do not evaluate it. They say that discourse solves for valuable things, but the permutation accesses that. Now, in the Olson 95, when capitalism inevitable worldwide, people have been exposed to socialist regimes already incredibly hesitant from shifting weight in capitalism to fear destruction, meaning that you should all vote for their critique and certain positions inherent privilege, except their alternative presupposes is opposition to the specific times of actor, which their alternative is something that can be applied widely to people discussing capitalism and judging it. That's now they can only solve. They say there's no warrant, but it is warranted by the fact that people have been through this experience before and got really abused and jacked by it.